making abortion illegal throughout America. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Allan Parker, president of the Justice Foundation, thejusticefoundation.org. Mr. Parker received his JD degree with high honors from the University of Texas School of Law in 1979. He's a former law professor and was lead counsel for Norma McCorvey, formerly Roe of Roe v. Wade, from 2000 to 2012, and Sandra Cano, the Doe of Doe v. Bolton, until 2014 in their efforts to overturn the two landmark cases that brought legalized abortion on demand to America. We're very blessed to have him here with us today. Mr. Allan Parker, welcome to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm great, and it's an honor to be with you today. Thank you for having me on your program.
Absolutely. Great to have you here. And so let's start with the personal story. What do you remember about when Roe and Doe, when those rulings came down in 1973?
Well, you may laugh at me and think I had a terribly formed conscience at the time, but it honestly didn't make much of an impression on me at all. At that time, I was still just a junior in college, I guess. 1973 was actually the year I did get married, though. So I was kind of focused on myself, my wife, and the fact that we were going to get married. Even while I was a senior in the University of Oklahoma, and she was a sophomore, but she completed her college degree in 3 years so she could get out when I did, because I had a 2-year stint in the Army to do, and that also kind of focused my attention. So to be honest, it did not make that much of an impression upon me at the time.
Okay, yeah, it's a question I love to ask for folks that were coming up through that time, and yeah, it's interesting. I know as a nation, as a culture, it seemed to not be a major story that day, actually, either. But a few years down the road, you decided to study law as a young man in the late 70s. What was driving you at that point into legal studies?
Well, again, my moral formation was not very strong at that point. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I took the LSAT exam, and I enjoyed the test. I enjoyed the logic, and I'd been in the Army for 2 years. They were going to pay my law school or wherever I wanted to go, and I said, I'll try it. If I like it, I'll stay in. So I didn't have a deep heart for justice at that moment or anything. I did well in law school, but I had always done well in school academically. But when I went to the University of Texas Law School, everybody there was a very top scholar, to be frank. And so I had to work very, very, very hard. And I kind of emotionally abandoned my wife and new child that I'd had. I wasn't cruel or anything like that, but I told her, I'll see you a few hours a week during the week. Other than that, and on Sunday I'll go to church with you, but other than that, I'm going to be studying. And it was really during that period of time that my wife kind of felt abandoned by me and became depressed with a new baby in a new city. She didn't have any friends. And she really surrendered her life to the Lord at that time and said, Lord, if you want this life, you can have it. So there was a kind of a dramatic change when she shifted her attention to the Lord and surrendered to Him and began reading the Bible. And then we got out of law school, and she had her friends pray for me. And we went on a Catholic marriage encounter weekend. And on that weekend, of course, they asked you about your relationship with God and your wife and with the world. And it was on that weekend, about a year or two after law school for me, that I really knew that God was real, and I had been living my own life. And I surrendered myself to Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior on that weekend. And I said, oh, no more running away, Lord. If you want me to be a missionary in Africa, I'll do that. If you want me to stop being a lawyer, I'll do that. And I really meant it at that time. And that's when there was a dramatic change in my life. I had an experience where I wanted to read the Bible and I could understand it, and I began to study it, and I just began to see miracle after miracle after miracle in my life as I wanted to know the Word of God and to study it, and as I began to follow Him. It was a few years after that that I started saying, well, Lord, do you want me to go be a lawyer? He said no, but He kind of miraculously took me to be a law professor at St. Mary's University School of Law in San Antonio, Texas. It was kind of a miracle. I went to one of my former law partners. I'd been a law partner in a law firm. And I said, Richard, I think I'm going to be leaving the partnership. I've given my life to the Lord, and I want to do things for Him now. And he said, well, have you ever thought about being a law professor? And I had not, but I had said, God, you know me better than I know myself. You pick the job for me. If you want me to stay as a lawyer, I'll stay here. But if you want something else, and he said, well, St. Mary's doesn't know it, but they need a law professor. This was the beginning of August. School was going to start in about 3 weeks. And he said, I want to stay and help one of my former partners who's gotten cancer with his practice. But I've been kind of hesitating. What do I tell St. Mary's? I don't want to leave them in a lurch. If you would be willing to let me put your name in, I'd feel a lot better. And I knew that was the door that God was opening up for me. I had never planned to be a law professor, but I told him, you know me better than myself. Turned out to be a great job and a wonderful time with students, and just a blessing from the Lord to hold that position.
Wow. Yeah, praise God. Allan Parker is with us, president of the Justice Foundation. So, Allan, connect the dots for us from there as a law professor to the Justice Foundation.
Okay, so while I was as a law professor, you have to write law review articles. You know, that's part of the job. And so I wrote a law review article on school choice this was like the 1990s, 91, 92. And the question was, if you allowed the money to follow the child to the school of the parent's choice, would that be an establishment of religion forbidden by the Constitution, or would that be the free exercise of religion, which is permitted by the Constitution? And I wrote an article under the Texas Constitution, and I found out that as I researched it, not only would it be permissible in Texas, you could make an excellent argument that it was a right of parents to direct the upbringing and education of their children and to take their money to the school of the parent's choice, because the language said, a general diffusion of knowledge being essential for the preservation of liberty, right? So that's the purpose of education, comma, it shall be the duty of the legislature to establish a suitable and efficient system of public free schools, not even free public schools like we think today, but any group of parents could start their own school, hire a teacher, and apply for reimbursement based on the number of students they had attending. So it was called the community school system, suited the frontier days in Texas beautifully, and allowed parental responsibility to be supplemented and helped by the church, by the state and funding, but not dominated by the government as it is today. So I wrote that, and then some people came and said, would you litigate for it? And they said, well, you need to get the Institute for Justice do that. They were doing a lot of the time, and that group wasn't available to. So eventually they got $100,000, and we started the Justice Foundation. And our first case was to litigate for school choice in Texas so that parents could take their children and their share of the state funding, because that money belongs to the children and the parents. That's why they're called trustees of a school district, not the directors of a corporation or the overseers. They're the trustees. They hold the money in trust for the children. And we litigated for school choice. So I started in 1993. We won a victory at the Supreme Court of Texas. And they said, even though the legislature currently provides education through state agency and school districts, there's nothing in the Texas Constitution that requires them to do so. As long as there's a general diffusion of knowledge, the state can choose any method it wants. And so they did not impose school choice, but they opened the door and allowed it. And in 1995, we got the first open enrollment charter school program in Texas, which created a new kind of school. Non-government employees run by nonprofit corporations, but was still treated as a public school. But that broke through, and this last year in Texas, we got our first universal school choice program, and we have enough funding for about 100,000 students to start next year. And I believe that program's going to be expanded over and over and over again until every child is included in the program that wants to be.
Wow, outstanding! And how did the right to life also become a primary focus of the Justice Foundation?
So from 93 to 2000, we were limited government, free markets, private property, parental rights, including school choice. But then in 2000, we got the opportunity to represent Norma and Sandra, Roe and Doe, in their effort to reverse the two cases that brought abortion on demand to America. So to be honest, I began to pray real hard.
Yes, we're going to be back with much more with Allan Parker, president of the Justice Foundation, thejusticefoundation.org. So much ground to cover today, but do highly recommend going to the website, thejusticefoundation.org. You can find so much of what we're going to talk about, and probably much that we're not going to get to today on the website, thejusticefoundation.org. But as we get into the right to life and making abortion illegal throughout America, we're going to get into Allan Parker's vision proposal for making abortion illegal throughout America. If you listen to this show, you're going to be familiar with a lot of it, but some will be new. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Allan Parker, president of the Justice Foundation, thejusticefoundation.org. We're going to dive back in with Allan in just a moment. But first, if you are buying or selling a home, there's an easy way to help the Station of the Cross at the same time. Real Estate for Life has 1,400 experienced, morally grounded agents in the U.S. and Canada. Visit realestateforlife.org to find a Christ-centered, experienced realtor near you. And don't forget to mention the Station of the Cross. All right, I'm looking forward to diving into the vision proposal that you have on your website, thejusticefoundation.org. But before we go to that, share with us a little bit more. Tell us more about that experience of representing Norma McCorvey and Sandra Cano and what that was like. What can you share with us?
Well, it started for me in February 11th of 2000. That was a Friday afternoon. And the first one I talked to was Sandra Cano, who was known legally as Mary Doe of Doe v. Bolton. But her real name was Sandra Cano. And she called and said, "Mr. Parker, that case has been a doom on my shoulders ever since I got involved in it. And I didn't even want an abortion. I fled to Oklahoma to avoid having an abortion while that suit was going on." Now, this was shocking news to me. I'd never heard that before. And Doe v. Bolton was the companion case to Roe v. Wade, which created the health exception. So Roe created a trimester framework that kind of sounded like a compromise in a way. In the first trimester, you couldn't restrict abortion. In the second, you could protect women. In the third, you could even prohibit abortion. But see Doe v. Bolton. And Doe created the health exception. And it's a very deceptive phrase, because we all want to protect women's health. We want to do that. And even today, you think, well, should there be a health exception if a mother's health it's necessary to have an abortion? Well, that's a life-saving exception. If it's necessary to save the mother's life, that's not really an abortion, and it's not intended just to kill the child and end the pregnancy. It's being done to save the mother's life, and that's a legitimate purpose. So all pro-life laws have necessity for saving the life of the mother. But on the other hand, in Doe v. Bolton, the court said, well, psychological well-being is a part of health. Wouldn't we all agree with that? Yes, you want to be well-being and have happiness. So they basically said, They struck down a Georgia law that said if 3 doctors said you needed an abortion for health, you could get one, and said it's just between the woman and the doctor, and if she would not be happy having a child, then she can have an abortion. If she can find an abortionist who'll pay, who will receive the money to do it, she can get an abortion. That's why abortion could be done for any woman reason, really, because the woman just had to say, I wouldn't be happy having an abortion. I want to get an abortion. That's abortion on demand. Now, I then met Norma I talked to Sandra on Friday, and on Monday, February 14th, it was Valentine's Day, we went up to Dallas to visit Norma McCorvey, and we stayed in her house. And I have to say that between those 2 days, I'd been praying for about 30 days whether or not I should represent Norma and Sandra. And the Lord had given me the idea to collect women's testimonies. And because Norma and Sandra were parties to their cases, they could file Rule 60 motions that nobody else could file. This is where the party themselves says, our case is no longer just, it should be set aside. Now, normally that's the losing party who goes back after a certain amount of time and says, hey, we need to change the result in our case. But this was the first time in history 2 people who won landmark decisions wanted to go back to court. So I've been praying for about 30 days almost and saying, Lord, who can break through the stronghold of abortion? I said, Lord, it's the biggest brick wall in the law. We call it the abortion distortion. You don't even get normal law in this area because the covenant with death was so strong. And then she told me this story of fraud and deception. And then that night, my wife came home from the homeschool library, and she'd been putting some Dewey Decimals on books and said, I think this little book's for you. It's a little pamphlet called The Bed's Too Short and Other Spiritual Essays. And it's based on Isaiah 28:20, which says the bed's too short and the covers are too cramped. Well, how many people have ever heard about that? I'd never heard about it before. But the next morning, I got up to read the context of the scripture. And so this is what the book of Isaiah in chapter 28, verses 14 to 22. Thus says the Lord to the mocking judges who rule my people in Jerusalem. So God is speaking to the mocking judges. Now, the next thing these are the exact words of God. Behold, you've made a covenant with death, an agreement with the grave. You don't think the overwhelming scourge will reach you because you've covered yourself with fraud and deception. Wow. And I was just shocked because that's what Roe and Doe were, a covenant with death, an agreement with the grave. And there was this fraud and deception, not just the fraud that abortion is good for women or the fraud that it's not a baby, but literally fraud that the woman in the case wanted an abortion when she'd fled to Oklahoma to avoid having an abortion, which is part of the forced abortion stories that we've collected over the years. And once you make abortion legal, it actually allows other people to force a woman to have an abortion to solve their problem. Like parents who don't want their daughter to be pregnant, a man who doesn't want his child to be born because he doesn't want to be a father. He just wants unregulated sex. And the third is human trafficking and prostitution. So eventually we built a center against forced abortion to stop those. But that weekend, then so the Lord gave me this passage. Then he said, I will make justice the measuring line. Righteousness will become the plumb line. Hail will sweep away the refuge of lies. Waters will overflow the secret place, and your covenant with death will be annulled. The agreement with the grave will not stand. That was still God talking to the judges, that he was going to sweep away the refuge of lies. And the waters overflowing the secret place to me referred to the tears that I knew women would shed when they gave me their testimonies. That's what God told us to do. And I knew no woman would be able to do it without crying about telling the story of how she took the life of her own story, or was deceived into it, or forced into it, or whatever the circumstances were. But no woman is able to do that without suffering greatly. And that's why we began to represent Norma and Sandra and collect the testimonies of women hurt by abortion.
Wow. Allan Parker is with us, president of the Justice Foundation, thejusticefoundation.org. So after those many years then with Norma and Sandra, what happened in those cases as you tried to help them revisit those cases in the legal system? How did that turn out?
Well, you've mentioned our website once, and I do want to say that I went ahead and wrote a book about this called Reversing Roe v. Wade, My Journey with Roe, Doe, and God. And your audience now knows Roe and Doe are Sandra and Norma, and God is the one who really overturned Roe v. Wade. And once I had this promise from God that he was going to put it to death, and then I went forward, and people would ask me, did I ever think Roe would be overturned? And I said, yes, I do. And I said, God gave me this kind of particular promise, but you don't have to believe that. I said, millions of people are praying for the end of abortion and the reversal of Roe v. Wade. And I believe it's because of those millions of people praying for it that we're going to see victory in the case. And you asked me earlier where I was when Roe v. Wade came out. I can sure remember where I was when I learned that Roe v. Wade had been reversed. I was at a National Association of Christian Lawmakers meeting, and the room erupted in praise the Lord, hallelujahs, and thanksgivings to God for what he had done. But along the way with Norma, there were some disappointments. We collected the first 1,000 testimonies in about 3 years, and we filed Norma's motion first in the Dallas courthouse, and the judge denied our motion to reverse it in 2 days. He heard 5,000 pages of evidence, and the state did not oppose us because Texas was pro-life at that point, and yet he denied the motion and said, it's too late. It's been too long. This is settled law. So we took that case to the Fifth Circuit, and one of the judges on that court, Judge Edith Jones, gave a remarkable opinion in which she urged the Supreme Court to reconsider Roe v. Wade and reverse it. Now, she could not do that as a lower court judge. Only the Supreme Court could reverse Roe v. Wade. But in the year 2005, the Supreme Court declined to hear her case. So every year around the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, Norma felt guilty for another million children's death. She gave her life to Jesus in 1995, got baptized in a swimming pool. She was later catechized by Father Frank Pavone, a priest for life, and became a member of the Catholic Church. And I believe she died sanctified and has gone to heaven. Because she every year she felt terrible, though, that there was another million people. And shortly before she died, she and I talked. She was doing a film with a documentary crew from England or Scotland, and they were paying her for her story, as they should. And she said it's a pro-life movie, and she thanked me for trying to help her overturn Roe v. Wade, so that at least her name was cleared at the U.S. Supreme Court. The official records of the United States Supreme Court said Norma McCorvey was there. She swore an oath that working in the abortion clinics changed her mind. When she saw the horror of what goes on in abortion clinics, she said, I don't want this anymore. So I was pretty disappointed, but we still had Sandra Cano's case. Whereas the judge in Dallas denied the motion in 2 days, Sandra's judge in the federal court in Atlanta, where she lived and where the Doe v. Bolton case started, that judge held on to the case for 18 months. He made no ruling for 18 months. That was pretty amazing and extraordinary. In that case, though, the state of Georgia was opposing us, but he just held on to the case and held on to it for 18 months. And then when the Supreme Court denied Norma's case, which did not mean they ruled against her, they denied cert, and I need to explain that. Everyone who appeals generally files a cert petition. Please take our case. It's the name of the appeal. And they get 8,000 or 9,000 cases a year, and they only take 80 or 90 cases. So you have a 99% chance they won't take your case. But it has no precedential value. They're not ruling against you. They're just saying, we don't want to take this case at this time. So we kept fighting, and we took Sandra's case, and we continued to collect testimonies of women, and we kept fighting and fighting and fighting. And that's the rest of the story, more and more and more.
Yeah, we greatly appreciate the good work of the Justice Foundation and Allan Parker, who's with us here today. We're going to have him on the other side of the break, so stay tuned. But they, Justice Foundation, they did file 4 amicus briefs in the Dobbs case. Just incredible work here. We're going to be right back with more with Allan Parker. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Allan Parker, president of the Justice Foundation, thejusticefoundation.org. We're going to get back into it in just a moment. But first, don't forget about iCatholic Mobile for your mobile phone needs. When you subscribe to iCatholic Mobile, you do help fund the Station of the Cross. Check out iCatholic Mobile, iCatholicMobile.com. All right, and one more question before we dive into Allan Parker's vision proposal for making abortion illegal throughout America, which, again, very excited to get into this, but also need to ask this question because I noticed this. You mentioned this on your website, and I had never heard this bit of history before. I wonder if you could share more on it. And you write about the 1992 landmark case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And you write here, the U.S. Supreme Court had an opportunity to reverse Roe v. Wade and its companion Doe v. Bolton. And in conference, the justices voted 5-4 to overturn Roe and Doe. But at the 11th hour before the opinion was released, a centrist coalition of moderate judges, including Justice Kennedy, who switched his vote, was formed to write a compromise that would weaken the Roe and Doe decisions, but still leave abortion as the law of the land. I guess I just never heard this bit about they actually had the votes to overturn, and right at the end, Justice Kennedy flipped. Can you share anything more on this with us?
Yes, in some sense, we're not supposed to know those things. It's considered privileged information in the court. At the end of the oral argument, during that week of oral argument, usually they have what's called a conference. Just the judges go back in there. No clerks, no secretaries, no anybody but the justices. And the least senior judge sits by the door to answer the door if anybody knocks on the door to try to get the judge's attention for emergencies or something. But then they take a preliminary vote, and you either vote, to affirm or reverse the case that you're considering. And the group that's in the senior judge, who's in the majority position, gets to decide who would write the opinion. And at that time, later, one of the judges in their memoirs revealed that there were 5 votes to reverse Roe, and Justice Rehnquist assigned himself to write the opinion because he had dissented in the original Roe v. Wade case. And he wanted to say, this is why we should never have done this. But Justice Kennedy changed his mind, and that's permissible up until the day the opinion is released publicly. So when you pray for the Supreme Court, you may hear about an oral argument, and you want to pray for the court. Like right now, as we're recording this, about last week, there was a case where the Supreme Court heard a case where Colorado has banned Christian therapists from counseling young people who want to get rid of their same-sex attractions or trans identities or feelings that they're in the wrong body. But even if the parents and the minor wants counseling from a Christian therapist, Colorado forbids that. You can only affirm this gender dysphoria, which is really a psychological or traumatic dysfunction. And so the oral argument, the Justice Foundation represented a professor from St. Thomas University in that case. And so you might have heard about it, but we need to pray all the way until the cases come out. And the big ones often come out in June, which is kind of the end of the court's normal term from October to June. So, and then the last thing I want to say about this, we may hear more about it in coming days because Justice Rehnquist is writing us his memoirs. And you know how they always release tidbits of it to stir up interest in the book. He says that he was terribly conflicted in that case and almost resigned his position as a judge at that moment because he didn't think he could continue to protect abortion, but he did, and he weakened Roe v. Wade, but he continued to maintain the essential holding that a woman had a right to do that. So he made a very morally incorrect decision, but he may explain it himself some in his new book that's coming out in the next month or two, I think.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it would be another 30 years until Dobbs. Yeah, very sad to think about what occurred there. And this is based on the choices of human beings, those Supreme Court justices of the time there in 1992, so close to making the right decision. Unfortunately, they ended up going with an incorrect decision that has cost innumerable lives. And so this is what I love about the vision proposal right off the bat. This resonates with me. I believe this same exact thing. It goes along the lines of, I think, what we're talking about in terms of the choices that human beings have to make. In the end, it's very sort of ironic that in the end it is choice that actually is going to end abortion. That's the only reason we do have it is because human beings have made the wrong choice to allow abortion, allow child murder to be illegal. And when human beings decide to make it illegal, rightly so, that'll be the case. And that this we've seen this. We have a great analogy for this. For anybody who thinks that this can never happen, that this is impossible in some way, we have a great analogy in what we see with the trajectory of what happened with slavery in our nation. You write, is it possible to see in America where abortion is illegal in every state? To achieve this would be comparable to the elimination of slavery. Slavery today is unthinkable and illegal in all 50 states without exception. Can the same situation occur with respect to abortion? I believe it can, and with God's help, it will occur. And so to this, 2 points, just to double down in the point you already make here, the analogy with slavery, this was baked in to American society, to everything in our nation, the economic system, all of this. People said, oh, this is never going to be abolished. This is never going to go away. And yet there were abolitionists who persisted. And what happened? It became illegal. And then ultimately over time, it became unthinkable. Nobody's arguing for slavery today. We look back and we think how terrible that was ever allowed. Same can be true and ought to be true with abortion, and that this final point, I believe it can, and with God's help, it will occur that this will take place. The problem is not on the side of God, right? He is pouring out the grace for sure. We know this. The problem is on the human side. We need to participate with that grace and have the focus and put forth the effort. That is what I appreciate so much about finding you and the Justice Foundation here, is that you certainly seem focused on the goal and trying to figure out how to push things forward. Anything else, I guess, you want to say just about helping people to understand that not only is this possible, but it has to happen, but it's only going to happen if we really put forth the effort, participate with God's grace.
And I would mention His grace and prayers. One of the things that we're going to give you a little bit later on in this program is some prayer points, what to be praying for the Supreme Court. And I'd love for members of your audience to spread those as far as possible. I always told people Roe was never going to be reversed until there was a proper legal strategy, but millions of people had to be praying. And so we kept pushing, and we eventually came up with the Moral Outcry petition, which were 5 reasons why Roe v. Wade should be reversed. And there are also 5 reasons why abortion could become unthinkable. First of all, we did compare slavery. We called it a crime against humanity, which is when the government withdraws legal protection from a class of human beings, like slavery, like segregation, which were both decisions of the Supreme Court, and not necessarily just the choice of all Americans. And then one of the Supreme Court's greatest case, Brown v. Board of Education, did not create new rights for African Americans. It simply reversed a 58-year-old precedent of the Supreme Court that was called Plessy versus Ferguson. And what Plessy had done in 1896 was uphold separate but equal. The words of the Constitution in the 14th Amendment for African Americans were supposed to be, we get equal protection of the laws. But the Supreme Court gave them less and said, well, separate but equal is good enough. And so they, in 1954, they finally said, we were wrong, and now it's time to give full protection to African Americans and equal protection. So I believe the Supreme Court's going to wake up and do that also in this case. The second thing is that abortion hurts women. We collected already 4,728 legally admissible written testimonies, and we put all of those in the Dobbs decision that reversed Roe v. Wade. One of the briefs we represented and we filed in the case was on behalf of over 2,000 women who'd had abortions, asking the Supreme Court to stop the killing of children and injuring women through abortion. We also represented the Jewish pro-life Foundation, who said abortion was like a Holocaust. It was a crime against humanity, just as killing the Jews in the Holocaust was a crime against humanity. We also represented the first formally frozen human embryo to ever file a brief at the Supreme Court. Her name was Hannah, and she was frozen for 2.5 years before she was adopted biologically and brought to life by her mother and father who adopted her. And again, they had legally adopted her, used a legal adoption process. Though it wasn't a formal legal adoption, they followed all the steps. Because unfortunately, those human beings are still treated as property in America. But let's get back on the right to life right now. The third argument is that we made is abortion is a crime against humanity. It hurts women. And there's a better alternative today, and that's the safe haven law in all 50 states. No woman has to parent a child if she doesn't want to. Under the law of all states, including liberal states like Massachusetts, New York, California, Illinois, that allow abortion up to birth, they also say that a woman can surrender her child at birth or up to a certain number of days afterwards, usually 3, 30, 60, or 90 days, depending on the state. But everywhere she can walk out of the hospital, leave the baby behind, and be free of 18 years of parenting obligation and expense. But she can't kill the child. I mean, if she does harm the child, then that's criminal neglect, abandonment, or murder if that boy is born. But it's still a baby in the womb, and we should make abortion murder again everywhere in America, as it was for 200 years in American history. And this is where we have to find the right to life in the Constitution again, in the history of America. So if I could, I'd like to go into that a little bit at this point.
Yes, please go for it.
So is there a right to life in the Constitution? I started asking a lot of people that in January to March of this year, and pro-life leaders. And people would say, oh, I hope so, or I think so, or there has to be, or blank looks, or one of the common answers actually was that, self-evident truths, right to life, happiness, pursuit of liberty, And I'd say, well, that's part of it, but that's the Declaration of Independence. That's not in the Constitution. So one of the things we're switching is our language, because by God's amazing grace, and the fact that a New York playboy named Donald Trump would become the most pro-life president in American history and get 6 judges now on the court who believe in originalism, there are 2 life clauses in the Constitution. No, number 1, the 5th Amendment, no person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. And the 14th Amendment, nor shall any state deprive a person of life without due process of law. So what did life mean to the founders? Did life begin in the womb, or did life begin after birth? Not surprisingly, they knew human life began in the womb, and they protected life for 200 years. And this is the year of the Declaration of Independence, and we're going to become one nation under God again and protect human life.
Yes, keep the prayers going, pray and work. We're going to have more with Allan Parker when we get back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens is the host here with our guest today, Mr. Allan Parker, president of the Justice Foundation, thejusticefoundation.org. Having a great conversation here. Unfortunately, one show I don't think is enough. We're going to ask Allan. Hopefully he'll come back on for a part 2 here. We're going to get to as much as we can, though, in this final segment. But first, do want to remind you, it's time. The National Men's March to Abolish Abortion Rally for Personhood in Boston, Massachusetts this weekend, Saturday, November 1st, All Saints Day. All pro-life people come and join us. 11 a.m. The men gather outside the Planned Parenthood Abortion Killing Center on Commonwealth. We'll march at 11:30, and then we'll get to the rally. For the rally to begin at 12:45. All women, children, families join in at the rally, 12:45 to 2 p.m. We got a great group of national speakers that are going to be there. All the information at themensmarch.com. That rally is going to be at the Parkman Bandstand in the Boston Common there. And remember, men, this is to get off the sidelines, right? Let's get together. Let's get off the sidelines. As we've been talking about here, not only is abortion, it's child murder, it's killing human beings, killing babies, but it's also harming women. And what is a man's role if not to stand up for defenseless women and children? We've got to get off the sidelines. We got to proclaim the truth in the public square. We got to pray and work and keep pushing towards the end of this ongoing daily mass murder of abortion, of child murder. And so let's get together in Boston, Massachusetts on November 1st, All Saints Day. Again, all the information there at themensmarch.com. But let's get back to the work of the Justice Foundation here and Mr. Allan Parker. And we left off talking about the existing right to life as expressed in the U.S. Constitution, as you were mentioning. And we all want to internalize this. This is what we're trying to educate on this show all about, is that we should be able to rattle this off, right? That yes, the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment speaks to this. The due process clauses in both the 5th and the 14th Amendment speaks to this. And it's all there. And if you look at the original intent of those that wrote those amendments, and particularly the 14th Amendment, the scholarship of Josh Craddock, the scholarship of Robert George, John Finnis around all of this, as Robert George says, it's an avalanche of evidence here that it's expansive, that this is to cover all human beings from the as soon as you can detect life going forward. That's how they thought about it, and that's right there. And as Allan has already mentioned here in this show, we currently have a current makeup on the court where we have 6 Supreme Court justices who are originalists in some sense, that this would be a very persuasive argument to them. We know it was an amicus brief that was submitted specifically on this point by George and Finnis to the Dobbs case. The Supreme Court didn't take it up. I guess they didn't want to deal with that question at this time. So it seems, in my view, Father Stephen Imperato, who's on every Friday, we talk about this all the time. It seems, Allan, that this has to be put before them in some way that forces them to answer this narrow question, to make them deal with it. Because while we think they would rule favorably on this question, it seems they don't want to take this question up. So yes, pray, but then also a strategy. How do we get this particular question before them? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a number of legal strategies that could work, and they're actually going on throughout the country right now. There's a lawsuit against New York's law allowing abortion up to the moment of birth. There's state procedures attacking Planned Parenthood for not telling women the truth that abortion is the termination of the life of a separate, living, unique human being. The federal government could take action. And I think there's numerous cases, but the hardest thing to do is to predict which case it will be. They just keep coming and coming and coming because the pro-life side won't give up. The issue doesn't go away. And I believe within a few years, they will be forced to take a case along these lines, and they will rule the right way. They were not even really asked to rule that there was a right to life in the Dobbs case that reversed Roe v. Wade. The state only had to prove there was no right to an abortion and that their law was rational, and that's what they did. And thank God that Roe v. Wade was reversed. But now the judges want to know what they're open to the meaning of every word in the Constitution. And as we've said, there's two life clauses, the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. Now, those have traditionally been called the Due Processes Clause. Why? Because it says no person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. But every word is critical. Every word has meaning. They could just as easily be called the life clauses. And just think about it. What does it take under those life clauses or due process clauses to take the life of a human being? They have to commit a very serious crime. They have to be convicted by a unanimous jury of 12 people. They have to be given the right they have to be appointed a counsel to defend their right to life, and they have to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't do anything like that for the children whose lives we're taking away. And what is a right to life except a right to live? As soon as you're alive, you get to stay alive. The government cannot kill you. And there's no denying that human beings in the womb are human beings alive. I'm going to read now the Declaration of Independence. For 100 years, the lawyers, judges said the Declaration doesn't matter. It's not part of the Constitution. The 5th and the 14th are. They have to admit that. But now the Declaration under originalism helps us define what does the Fifth Amendment mean. In 1776, that was just 15 years before the Constitution. So I'm going to review this. We're going to read it together. If we were in a large audience, I'd say let's all read it together. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So is there a right to life? Yes. Who does it come from? The Creator. And that's endowed with an inalienable right. And it was this being created equal that allowed us to end slavery in America, even though we didn't do it immediately upon the implementation of the Constitution. Now, that to secure these rights, what right? Life, governments are instituted among men. The purpose of government is to protect life. We had a Declaration of Independence and a Revolutionary War to create a government that would protect life, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And originalism is a just powers doctrine. Why do I mean that? The judges don't get to take the word due process and create a right to abortion out of it, like they did, or to create a gay marriage right or something like that. They're supposed to follow the words of the Constitution. That's doing justice. because then it's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, one of the things, since I know your audience, a lot of them are praying people, I want to encourage them that we started praying that the Supreme Court would find this right to life and proclaim it and eventually apply it in a particular case. Well, they've already found it, they're proclaiming it, and they have it on the walls of the main entryway of the Supreme Court. These life clauses are there now. And I just quote from one of the founders: with consistency, beautiful and undeviating, human life from its commencement to its close is protected by the common law. In the contemplation of life, life begins when the infant is first able to stir in the womb. By the law, life is protected not only from immediate destruction, but from every degree of actual violence, and in some cases, from every degree of danger. That's what the court is going to find when it restores the real Constitution of the people.
Yes, thejusticefoundation.org. God bless you.